How do you prepare for a conversation that you expect will be difficult? Effectively analyzing data is often a team sport, and when you work in teams, communication is crucial. How you prepare for and approach these conversations can make all the difference in outcomes and the relationships with your collaborators. I'm Ann Milley, your host for today's event, and I'm excited to learn more about communication and collaboration in teams seeking insights from data. Communication is something we all do, but it's not something we talk about often enough. Professors Emily Griffith and Julia Sharp have some thoughtful, helpful, well-researched views on communication and collaboration across disciplines using data and statistics. They have sage advice on how knowing our weaknesses and leveraging our strengths during difficult conversations can actually enrich relationships. Both have won the American Statistical Association's Outstanding Mentor Award from ASA's section on statistical consulting. Both have loads of experience in applied statistics and collaborative statistics, and both have extensive publications. Please share what you learn on social media using #StatsSpeaking. Let's get to our talk. Excited to hear from our speakers, but first, a bit more about them. Dr. Emily Griffith in the Department of Statistics and the Data Science Academy at North Carolina State University works to develop strategies to further innovation in the university's data science initiatives by training graduate students in interdisciplinary data science collaboration. Dr. Griffith was elected to serve as the ASA Council of Chapters Governing Board District 5 Vice Chair starting in 2023. Dr. Julia Sharp in the Department of Statistics at Colorado State University was recently selected as an ASA Fellow. She has been the director of the Graybill Statistics and Science Laboratory since 2016 at CSU. She's been collaborating around campus and training the next generation of applied statisticians. She's also currently serving as past chair of both the ASA Council of Chapters Governing Board and the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Outreach Group, for which she led the formation in 2020. I love that these professors have joined forces on their talk for effective collaboration. Let's learn from them. And don't forget to ask questions throughout the event. We'll get to those right after this talk.
Hi, today we're going to talk about experiences in navigating tough conversations in statistical collaboration.
I'm Emily Griffith. I'm an associate professor of the practice at North Carolina State University and also the director of consulting in our Data Science Academy.
I'm Julia Sharp. I'm at Colorado State University in the Department of Statistics and also the director of the Graybill Statistics and Data Science Laboratory here at CSU. We'd also like to acknowledge Megan Higgs and Zach Weller for their contributions to this project. So what makes a conversation tough or difficult? Well, the expectations of two parties might be misaligned. The tone of either party could lead the conversation down an unintended path. Particular topics and even words can raise the profile of a conversation from congenial to tough. Emily, do you have other thoughts here?
I do. I think sometimes people are already frustrated by the time they come see a statistician. And so that can set a conversation off on the wrong path before anything even really happens.
That's so true, so true. And also aligned with that third bullet point there about even words and topics, sometimes we're even speaking about statistics and statistical terms in the same context, but in different phrases. And so that can lead to a difficult conversation as well. Also, if we're not necessarily connecting with the science, that can lead to a difficult conversation. And tone can matter, and tone is often hard to read by email, for example. So it leads us to think about, well, why should we have these difficult conversations in the first place? In other words, why can't we move on without having these conversations and without having a mutual understanding? So Jeff Hancher put together a podcast actually about the 5 whys for having tough conversations. So the first point that Hancher mentions is that we want to build mutual trust and respect. So agreement is not a requirement for that mutual trust and respect. Honesty leads to building respect with a collaborator, and by having that tough conversation with a collaborator, they will know that they can trust you for this and other topics. Brené Brown says we need to be vulnerable in order to be courageous. So we need to trust in order to be vulnerable, and we need to be vulnerable in order to trust, to build that trust. And so building that mutual trust and respect is an important reason why we should go ahead and have these difficult conversations. Another reason in the 5 whys is to communicate value. And so by having a tough conversation with a collaborator, they know that we value them enough to have that conversation. And then the 3rd reason why is to clarify the future. So people want to know where they stand on this and on future topics. So it's important for us to have the conversation so that we can clarify where we are going in the future. Number 4 is to reveal blind spots. So tough conversations can help both parties understand where their understanding is falling short. So where are we misinterpreting things in this conversation, which can also help us in other conversations. Number 5 is to allow us to grow, which is related to what I was just saying. And number 4, uncomfortable conversations allow us to grow and stretch and become more comfortable, not only with this topic for this tough conversation, but also in general. It also helps in the future when we have this topic come up again with maybe with the same person, maybe with somebody different, or maybe we're talking to others about this same topic and it becomes difficult, but we've already had that experience. So it allows us to grow. So I'd like for us to think about some particular scenarios, and I'd like for you all to think about some particular scenarios that you have in mind that can lead to tough conversations. So for me, some of those particular scenarios, they might be different than yours. I hope that they're different from yours. So co-authorship is sometimes uncomfortable for me. It may not be difficult, but it's uncomfortable. Talking about funding for projects, you know, I've set an hourly rate and I've tried to figure out the amount of time, which is another uncomfortable conversation, the amount of time that it might take me to work on a project. All of those things are difficult for me. Another thing that is difficult for me, a tough conversation that has come up recently, is related to the scope of a project or recommending a method that isn't standard in the field. So for example, I recently had a collaborator come to me. They wanted to do this type of analysis. It's called a structural equation model. And structural equation models are known to have, you need a really large sample size in order to conduct this type of analysis. And this collaborator had a very, very small sample size. I want to say it was even less than 10 observations, and wanted to conduct this structural equation model. And I recommended that we do several regression analyses, and that wasn't taken very well. And so that led to a very tough conversation. Emily, what particular scenarios do you have in mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. I completely agree about co-authorship and funding. And then one that I run into a lot here, since I work with a lot of students, are when people have sort of inherited an experiment or a research project and they don't know all of the settings. So recently I worked with a student who's trying to analyze a crop study, but the crop study has had a different faculty member in charge every year. And so the location was changed every year, the measurement was changed every year, the treatment levels were changed every year. And what we have now is sort of a frustrated student who's left to kind of salvage this project. And so to prepare for working on projects like this, one of the things that I find that I really have to do is to keep in mind that data issues aren't necessarily somebody's fault, and to really avoid having that kind of language or that kind of tone when I'm working with somebody, because I don't want to communicate that even sort of unconsciously to somebody who's already feeling frustrated that way, because then they won't be happy at all, or very receptive to the advice that they're getting.
Very true. Very true. Good points. And so then thinking about, we're going to think about this more than just on this slide, but in order to prep for the conversation here, what do you do to prepare for a conversation that you expect will be difficult? And I'll let you go first here, Emily.
Okay, sure. So there's a couple different levels that I'll prepare. Physically, I'll prepare by trying to get a good night's sleep and maybe eating a snack, so that I can be friendly and in a more calm state of mind. If I'm having a really busy day, I might try to have a difficult conversation on a different day so that I have time to dedicate to it. So that, and then if I think there's going to be technical questions or technical issues that arise, I'll look into those a little bit. And I also will try to come up with some solutions ahead of time that I can propose, so that I'm not just stating a problem, but that I'm stating a problem with an idea for a way that we can fix it. What about you?
Yeah, that's great. I do a little bit of research. So we do some intake forms. So we get a little bit of information sometimes on projects. So I'll do a little bit of research on the project, especially if it's related to some technical terms. I'll also maybe look up the background of the person, or in the meeting, I'll try to understand the background of the person and try to understand where they're coming from, in particular as it relates to their statistics background. Have they taken a course? What coding have they done in the past? That helps me to prepare for the conversation on the particular analysis that they're going to do, and also helps me alleviate any concerns that we may have about me proposing that they run some sophisticated model that nobody in the room understands except for me and who knows else. So yeah, in the meeting, I do a little bit preparation as well, but beforehand, I might do, as you do, do a little bit of research, as well as, taking a few minutes before the meeting, doing a little bit of self-reflection before and after a meeting can really be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so when you're preparing for and approaching these difficult conversations, we covered a little bit of this, but it's really important to identify your goals and know where you stand. So is email a good way to pass along the information? Should you meet in person? Is it better to have a quick communication with maybe even a phone call? And then you want to map out the conversation. And this is where it comes back to looking at those goals. So what are your goals? Do you want to communicate a point? Do you want to do something? Do you want to not do something? And thinking about the things that you can control and the things that you can contribute, and what you're willing to do and what you're unwilling to do, can help you map out a conversation. So if they say this, then you can propose, your first solution that you came up with. Whereas if they're interested in something else, perhaps you have a backup plan. And so really mapping out what you want to say and what you want to cover. And then you can practice the conversation. You can go through it out loud, maybe when you're driving, or when you're by yourself, and really think about how you're communicating, how you're saying the things that you want to say, and what information you feel comfortable communicating, and if there's parts of whatever you're trying to say that are a little bit less comfortable for you, to work on those a little bit. So another thing that helps with practicing the conversation can sometimes be writing it down. And that could be an email draft that you never send or some sort of document to really get your ideas out and solidified and figure out how you want to talk about the ideas that you have. So we also want to play to your strengths. And so this is maybe you're really good in person. Maybe you're a really persuasive writer. Maybe you know some people that you can connect with who can give you some advice about how to approach a particular topic or a particular person or a particular position in your organization. And so you want to play to your strengths and set yourself up for success. And then all of this sort of leads to, if you're feeling stuck or you're feeling overwhelmed, that you can seek support from colleagues or your professional organization, like the American Statistical Association, or both. And just specifically for statistical consulting, I know that the consulting section has a speed mentoring program where you can get a very short-term mentor for a very specific project. And that is just available through their website. And that's a great resource for somebody who just needs somebody to talk to, somebody to be a sounding board for you. And so I think all of this really is just preparing, right? And you don't want to go into a difficult conversation thinking that it's going to be fine and then breezing right through it. Julia, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
I was just going to say that all of these things can go together too. So Emily and I are great friends and colleagues, and so I seek support from Emily to help me map out the conversation and practice the conversation, or write down notes, and then we pass them back and forth. So I think that all of these things go hand in hand with each other.
Absolutely, yes. And you are one of the people that I seek support from too. So absolutely sharing a doc or an email or even a text message if it's quicker and maybe a little bit more informal, just getting, how is the tone in this? What should my goal be? Like, does this sound like a reasonable goal? And things like that. And I really have found the framework of goals to be one of the most helpful things in preparing for a difficult conversation, because it really lets you focus on something instead of being more scattered. So the other thing to remember with a difficult conversation is that there might be conflict, and that conflict is okay. And this can be really uncomfortable. I know that I don't love conflict, and so I'm never happy when it happens, but sometimes it does. And so what you want to do is make sure that what you desire to be heard is heard, but you also have to listen. You also have to listen to the other person and then try to find some kind of compromise. And that compromise could even be referring them to somebody else, or any number of things. But there's often a wide range for compromise, especially once everybody has sort of stated what their goals are. As far as mindset and preparing for mindset, you really need to be willing to listen. You need to stay calm, be patient. I statements versus you statements, right? You brought me bad data, or I am going to have a hard time working with the data that you have because, it's bad. I mean, you wouldn't want to say it's bad. But that kind of thing. And then the other thing is that you want to anticipate obstacles, but don't psych yourself out. Sometimes conversations can go much better than expected. This is sort of a side story, but I worked on a project where I was reanalyzing a data set from a paper that had been rejected. And the scientists were concerned that there were some mistakes in the original analysis. And I found some mistakes in the original analysis. And when I fixed it, all of the statistical significance disappeared. And we can have a separate conversation about statistical significance and how much we should rely on that. But I was horrified in the moment that I'd sort of given them null results, right? They wanted me to fix their experiment, and I felt like I had ruined it. And so I prepared and we got on the phone, and they said that it made so much more sense because they had peeked at the data and hadn't seen anything and didn't know how to explain the patterns that had shown up because of the mistake. And so you really don't want to psych yourself out, but you do want to have information ready if you need to sort of advocate for yourself or explain your own positions. And then the last thing is this balance between knowing what you want to get and proclaiming what you want to get in the conversation. And so you can be firm in your stance without being overbearing and without being pushy. And you want to try to strike that balance. Julia, do you have anything you want to add or a story you'd like to share?
Oh, I was just going to say that conflict is okay, and it allows us to grow. It goes back to one of Hancher's 5 points of conflict is okay. It is very uncomfortable, but we will grow from these experiences.
Absolutely. And I love that list that you found. And I find myself reminding myself of that if I'm expecting to have a difficult conversation. So we've mentioned a couple times, I think, how we can play to our strengths, or that we should play to our strengths. And so you can identify and use your communication strengths and weaknesses. And so some strengths are active listening, giving and receiving feedback. Some people are really good at that. Friendliness, empathy, responsiveness, confidence, respect. And then common barriers to effective communication that I think we might all sort of fall into sometimes, but can pay attention and try to avoid, are being judgmental, giving unwanted advice, being overly technical in our language, and not paying attention is a big one, avoiding the concerns of others, and again, responsiveness. And so you can look at this list and sort of think about what things you're good at and what things you want to work on, knowing, of course, that none of us are going to be great at everything on this list. So Julia, what are your strengths and how do you use them?
Yeah, I was just going to mention one barrier or one weakness that I might have, especially in Zoom world, is getting distracted really easily and not paying attention. So that's something that I need to work on, definitely, especially in the Zoom virtual world. But I do think that I'm a good listener. I think that I am relatable. I think that I am easy to talk to, and I can understand sciences with enough detail and not a lot of jargon. I think that I'm empathetic and I can relate to people again. I'm also pretty good at being self-deprecative. So I self-deprecate pretty well. I have that balance where I can self-deprecate, but not too much. So I have a good balance there. How about you? What are your strengths?
Yeah, so I like to think that I'm empathetic and that I'm good at explaining things. And I know that I'm good at helping people feel more confident in their own work because I get that feedback pretty regularly, which is nice because that's definitely a goal that I have, especially when working with students. And then I really like that you're good at that balance with being self-deprecating because I think that I can be too self-deprecating. So I'm trying to stop that for a while so that I can get that balance right instead and sort of have a good balance of taking my work seriously while not taking myself seriously, but coming across as taking my work seriously.
That's great.
All right, so if you've done this work to prepare for a conversation and you're in the conversation and then it starts escalating, there are some skills that you can use to de-escalate a difficult conversation. So the first thing is to just check your own assumptions about why the other person is reacting the way they are. So if they're really frustrated, they aren't necessarily frustrated with you. They might be, but they might not be. So really think about if you're taking something maybe more personally than it needs to be taken. You can also take a break if needed. And I have told this to my students, and luckily they rarely need to use it, but nobody should be yelled at work, right? Or ever really, but definitely at work. And so if you're meeting with somebody and they start yelling, it's time to end the meeting. And you can schedule a follow-up meeting later via email if you want to, where everybody's going to be calm. So the flip side of that is that you have to remain calm and professional too. You cannot yell, you cannot scold, and you don't want to shame the other person for whatever it is that you're discussing. And you do want to stop talking and start listening. And here, listening is really listening. So it's not that listening where you're spending the time the other person is talking, preparing for the next thing that you're going to say, where you're going to win the argument or successfully defend yourself, but it's actually listening to what they're saying. And so this quote from the book Leadership in Women in Statistics really spoke to me, which was, uncomfortable and difficult situations are frequently only the result of misperception, and you can make an effort to view them differently. And I think it's really easy to get entrenched in your focusing on defending yourself and forget that you really need to listen to the other person who may also be feeling a little attacked. Julia, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think that those are great points. I think that another way to de-escalate difficult conversations is to validate feelings and experiences, let people know that you are listening. So some phrases that have helped me are, I hear what you're saying. Let's see how we can work together to do XYZ, or to understand each other. This is what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? So trying to really understand where the person is coming from. And I really like that quote. And I also want to say that it is pretty easy to take things personally and to not reflect in the moment about, okay, well, where are they coming from? But it's really important that you don't take things personally, because we're all after the same goal, assuming that we've set the goals of the meeting ahead of time. But there should be no taking it personally if we're all under the same goal. Like, we are all working here together to work towards the same goal. So let's do that effectively and efficiently. And so how can we make that happen? I think, saying those words out loud sometimes can also help to de-escalate the conversation.
Yeah, that's great advice. I really like the phrases that you used, and also definitely keeping in mind that we're on the same team. I think is a really helpful way to approach these conversations. So Julia and Megan Higgs, who we mentioned earlier, and I worked together to create these videos. And we're going to watch one of these videos now. And what we want you to watch for in the video is disappointment and a response to that disappointment, and maybe some confusion and a response. And we have 2 questions that we'd like you to think about how the statistician behaved during this.
Good to see you again. Last meeting, we discussed a possible approach, and as a first step, I created some visualizations of your data.
I don't really know if it's worth the time to go through visualizations. I probably won't have enough space for more than one figure when I publish. I was really looking forward to seeing the results.
I apologize for any misunderstanding. I should have been more clear about next steps at the end of our last meeting. Visualizing the data is an integral part of analysis. It helps us understand the information available, check for possible errors, and assess modeling assumptions.
I guess that makes sense. It's just not something we ever did in my stats classes. I do always plot averages and error bars, though.
That's very common, though guidelines and software for plotting raw data are becoming more and more accessible. I definitely understand the constraints on figures for publication. Think about this step as part of the analysis process, rather than presentation of results.
Okay, I'm still a little concerned about why I never learned this before, but let's take a look.
One more thing before we begin. These plots can be a little overwhelming at first. I used colors, shapes, and panels to represent information from the study design, so it can be a little difficult to digest. Feel free to ask me any questions or tell me to slow down.
That's weird. I don't know why those 4 observations from the control group have noticeably larger values.
Is there anything you can think of that would connect those 4 individuals?
Not really. And I don't think it's worth looking into. Those points should be like any of the others.
Huh. Look at this. Here's a plot by time of data collection, and we can see those 4 points are grouped together in July. Does that offer any clues?
That could have been when we had our summer intern collecting data for us.
Do you have information about who collected the data at different times? We could use that to look into this further.
Not really. It would take some time to go back and figure out. I guess we'll just have to remove these 4 observations from the data because they're outliers and we can't trust them, right?
We definitely should not jump to excluding data. Decisions to exclude data should be taken very seriously. These decisions would have to be described and justified when the work is disseminated. We may, however, be able to help account for who collected the data in the analysis if we can get that information.
So now that we've watched that video, one of the things that we want to think about with having a difficult conversation is how do you explain things carefully and clearly without coming across as patronizing? Because I think the portion of the script where the statistician says that the visualizations may be overwhelming could come across as a little patronizing. Julia, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. And it is a challenge because you want to be able to explain things at the level of the person where they're at, right? And so sometimes I try analogies, but even that you have to be very careful about coming across as patronizing. So one of my favorite analogies is explaining effect size and thinking about miles per gallon in terms of effect size. So it's saying, you know, the difference between Toyota cars and Honda cars, for example, is 1 mile per gallon. And so the effect size there is 1 mile per gallon versus if I told you that it was 15 miles per gallon and that Hondas were the winner, and then you would go out and buy a Honda, right? And so sometimes people might think of that analogy as kind of low level, like, why are you telling me about miles per gallon of cars? So that could come across as patronizing. So doing those analogies in a meaningful way and getting to the point where you're talking about it as if you're trying to understand it as well. I think that helps to not come across as patronizing. What about you?
Yeah, I also really struggle with analogies. I feel like sometimes analogies I come up with fall apart when you try to follow them through to the conclusion. So I tend to rely on stories about similar studies or similar projects and what someone was able to do with their data and how they were able to successfully, you know, finish a project, complete a project, get their work out in a way that is similar to what I think that this person could do.
I agree. I often, along those lines, I often also will draw sketches of figures and tables to illustrate how I might show the data or how I might be thinking of it as a reader of an article or a table or figure. So that also helps me to show what I'm visualizing in my head, because otherwise no one knows what's in my head.
Yeah, absolutely. What about some potential challenges that can arise from the perception that statistics provides the answers in research?
Yeah, that's a great thing to think about. You know, we as statisticians, we don't necessarily want to be technicians. We want to be part of the team. And so that perception that statistics provides answers kind of is analogous to the statistician not being a member of the team. It can also lead to overgeneralization or overstating results. We might try to find something that is not there if we're trying to provide answers to research. And it also, that perception also may have us relying really heavily on the data from one study when really it's the culmination of many studies when we can provide answers. We can't do that from one study. Do you have thoughts on that?
I think you covered everything that I was going to say. I do think that sometimes thinking of statistics as providing an answer can lead us to be a little bit too deterministic in our thinking about that we have proven something to be true when that is not necessarily the case. And so the last question I wanted to ask you is, what are some other ways of handling timeline requirements and misalignments? And we saw that in this video when the researcher was disappointed that the analysis wasn't finished. And I know people often have external pressures on their time, and everybody needs to have their work done in a timely manner. And sometimes that can be difficult with prioritizing and finishing projects on time.
Yeah, I think that you just stated, I think, my answer. You know, everyone has external pressures, including the statistician. And so I think that stating that up front. I also think that, you know, I'm not very good at providing estimates of my time. So sometimes I think, oh, I should multiply by 5 when I think of an estimate. So I think in the moment, though, handling the timeline requirements, just letting the other person know that, you know, we have external pressures as well. We have certain evaluation criteria that we need to satisfy. We have these other projects that have come up that that came before this other project. So really setting those expectations ahead of time, but also as you go. I think that that's really important to help with handling the tough conversation that can occur from that. How about you?
Absolutely. I think you're definitely right expressing that. And then I think one of the things that I really try not to do is overpromise. And I know it's tempting, especially because I'm sort of a people pleaser and I want everybody to like me. It's tempting to be able to say that I can help everyone as quickly as they need it. And that is not true. And people are more upset finding out at the deadline that you have not met the deadline than they are finding out well ahead of the deadline that you are not going to be able to meet the deadline. And so keeping that in mind has really helped me stop overpromising on work. And really lets me, I keep a running list of everything that I'm working on so that I can keep in mind the other commitments that I have made when something interesting comes along.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Keeping that list is really important.
Mm-hmm.
So some final thoughts that we had here are that style and tone are unique to the researcher that you're talking to the collaborator, to the statistician, to the relationship that you have with that other person. But both style and tone can impact how tough conversations are processed in the moment. So we have to be careful about style and tone. We should play to our strengths and take the time that we need to process information, and also respect each other's position in the collaboration. And it's also really important to create that environment of mutual respect, noting that we're all after the same end goal and that we respect each other, and that's how we can grow and move forward together. Emily, do you have any other thoughts here?
I do. I just want to emphasize the idea of mutual respect, and that even when having a difficult conversation with somebody, treating them with respect the whole time, respect as a peer, respect as a colleague, respect maybe as a friend, can really help facilitate these conversations in a way that cannot be replaced by any amount of preparation or any amount of practicing on your own, that you have to have that respect for your colleagues and for the people that you're working with. And I think that people can tell when you respect them and they can tell when you can't. And so I think that that maybe is the most important point that we've made.
I agree. Thank you for that.
And thank you for having us. We really enjoyed this and we're excited to take your questions.
Thank you.
So interesting and such amazing takeaways. I'm eager to get to the questions that we have and dive deeper into this. So welcome, Emily and Julia. All right, so let's start with this one. Someone has asked, can you tell us more about the importance of data visualization during the exploratory phase? And Julia, shall we start with you on that one?
Yeah, great. Thank you. I really think that doing descriptive statistics and data visualization in the exploratory phase can help tell the story of the data. And then when you get to the inferential statistics part of the analysis, then the story is being backed up by the inferential statistics. So I really like to look at data visualizations as I'm starting to poke around at the data to help me visualize that story, but also it allows me to think about questions that I might have about the data as well that I can ask the researcher. So I think that that's a really critical part of the data analysis process.
Great. Anything to add, Emily?
Yeah, thanks. I agree completely with Julia and with the video that we made that the exploratory analysis is really important. And one of the ways that I try to convey that to people that I work with is that you should never be surprised by your statistical tests. And if your statistical tests are very surprising and very unexpected, oftentimes there is a problem somewhere along the line and it's not right. And so that maybe shouldn't be exciting, it should be a little alarming. And having a good exploratory data analysis can help you avoid that kind of mistake.
Great. I see lots of interest in the chat, but we're gonna stay with the questions and then we can maybe come back to some of the commentary. But I'm so happy the audience is so engaged in this topic. So this one is one that's already been commented on quite a bit. What to do about management who already have a predisposed opinion or view of a specific topic and only want the statistician to provide results that support their opinion or decision? You want to start with that one, Emily?
Sure. Yeah, this is hard. And so I think I have sort of a two-pronged approach. And the first prong is to not panic until there's a need to panic. And so maybe they're right and the data do support what they're interested in. And you can kind of, I don't want to say like skate by avoiding the whole conversation, but if the data are showing that something is effective and everybody wants it to be effective, then try not to worry about it ahead of time. If you start getting results or in your exploratory data analysis, you're not seeing anything, I think that the best thing to do is to lay that groundwork early. And these conversations can be helped by talking about like the effect sizes that matter and things like that ahead of time, or even starting to lay that groundwork while the analysis is happening. You know, if we see something like this, what does that suggest? Like, how can we frame it? Maybe we can talk about a broader set of measurements or things like that. But so that you're not surprising anybody with a negative finding.
Very good. Julia, anything to add to that?
Yeah, and to add on to Emily's discussion there, Emily and I have had a lot of conversations about remembering that a lot of people don't have bad intentions, that we are all trying to get to the same goal. And so we have good intentions mostly. And so trying to keep that in mind throughout, and communication. So communicating back and forth. I find myself communicating maybe too much. And so asking about that, but thinking about the data story again as you're going. I like what Emily said about, you know, thinking about what is happening right now in the data analysis and preparing for what could go differently. I also, if I've had this experience, and it is hard. And so I think finding someone in the organization that you can talk to help understand different opinions and different perspectives is oftentimes helpful. And sometimes it doesn't work out, and we just have to realize that we're growing through those experiences.
Right, that's good advice. And there's a related question someone's asked. Can you speak to the tension that can exist between those sponsoring research expecting one outcome and results that do not support that position? Who wants to start? Julia?
Yeah, I think the thing that I'll add is just those can be really intense, definitely in the moment. And so, like we said in the recording, taking a break and saying, you know what, we're not progressing, we're not moving forward here. Let's take a little bit of time and focus on our goal. And I've had this happen recently, actually, with that structural equation model researcher, where I said, let's take a break, and I'll send you some resources through email, and maybe we can come to an agreement through email about our shared goals, and hopefully we can move forward from there. And we did. We had a productive meeting after that happened, where we were able to take a break and come back refreshed and move forward in the project.
I'm sure those were some intense conversations. Anything else to add on that one, Emily?
Yeah, I just think, and this goes back to another point that we talked about trying not to take it personally, that it is really easy to take those intense conversations personally. And I try to remember that the person, the sponsor of the research, like, they believe in their product, they believe in whatever it is, and they want it to work. And if it doesn't, it's not my fault that it didn't work. And it's not their fault either, right? Like, sometimes things just don't work. And so really, I mean, and I don't know that I have any specific like things that can help, but just sort of reminding myself, this is not about me, right? This is about like what this study showed, and the measurements and things like that can help, at least on my end, de-escalate things a little bit.
And keep things objective. Yes, good advice. So many questions coming in. This is great. This one is interesting. Do you have phrases suggesting not to take it personally? And what are some phrases that could be misunderstood that the person is taking it personally? I ask because there were cultural differences I experienced that the conversations were misunderstood. And Emily, why don't we start with you on that one?
Yeah. So for phrases to help not take it personally, again, I just try to remind myself regularly that it's not personal, and it might feel personal. And then having somebody to sort of vent to is always really helpful to be able to sort of get that initial like upset out, and then go back to that it's not personal. So phrases that I've seen cause problems are frequently we'll talk about like a smaller data set. And if that smaller data set is the result of a ton of expense and time and work and effort, that can be really offensive to the person whose data they are. And that's a totally unintentional thing. Or if you talk about the data being messy or needing to be cleaned and things like that, I think a lot of times, if those words aren't clearly defined ahead of time or just sort of avoided, you could talk about data preparation instead or something like that. You don't want to give the impression that you think that somebody's data are bad. And if they are a mess, like, you can have a conversation about that, but again, without sort of being judgmental or harsh. And I think when you cross that line and it feels like you're judging the person instead of just like the Excel file, that's when things really go downhill.
Mm-hmm. Julia, did you want to comment on this one?
Yeah, I think as we mentioned, style and tone can also be very impactful. And so we refer to Janice Durr's book on communication in statistical collaboration quite often. And so one of the aspects of Janice Durr's book talks about these things. And so one of them is a question to a client about randomization. So you could ask that question of, you didn't randomize? And I made a face there. Let me say it without making a face. You didn't randomize versus did you randomize? Those come off very differently. And so the first one is sort of a directive, like, what? Why didn't you do this? And the second one is a more neutral toned, like, what did you do? What I need to know some details. So I think using those statements and some of those statements that we say pretty often, like, I need to know if you randomize. So I might write some of those down and think about how I can say them so that the tone doesn't come across as pointed.
Right. Okay, good. And you also had said earlier, the you and I, and if you're just all curious, what can we learn? Great. So many questions. This is great. How would you suggest dealing with individuals who, while are not statisticians, know enough about statistics to be dangerous and use that knowledge to justify their arguments? Have either of you encountered a situation that, Julia, you're shaking, or both of you? Emily, we'll go with you first.
All the time. So I think that I try to I think most of the time it can be fine until something goes wrong, right? And that's maybe where you need a little bit more expert advice, depending on I guess the amount of havoc that is being wreaked, right? So if somebody's coming in and sort of stepping all over the studies that you're working on and providing contradicting advice, then I think that's a separate conversation where you can talk to the people that you're working with about your process and how you think about things, and why you made the decisions that you made or the recommendations that you made, to sort of make that really clear, so that there isn't room for other opinions to maybe crowd you out, if that's happening. But otherwise, I do think that a lot of people get training on how to do a very specific thing in statistics, like analyze a specific type of experiment. And as long as everything is working, it's fine. And so I try to be generous in that. And there are a lot of perfectly reasonable things to do with data that aren't wrong. And as long as they're doing one of those things, it doesn't have to be what I would choose. It needs to be supported, valid, and reasonable. And so that's kind of where I draw that line.
Okay. Yeah, well, because we're all dealing with data, right? And we all have some level of data savvy, but sometimes people overstep. Did you want to comment, Julia?
Yeah, I think just like any other collaborator, I listen and say, all right, well, how can I help you? Because if they truly have it figured out, then they wouldn't be seeking my advice. So if they need my support, then I need to know what it is that I can do. And maybe I wouldn't be able to help them in the moment. So asking that question, how can I help you, leads to a conversation that we can have then, and then I can go and research if I don't understand or don't know anything about the topic at hand. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Boy, so many questions. It's hard to know which one to look at next, but we'll take this one. Any suggestions on how to get people to give you their data so it can be analyzed? I often encounter resistance on why I want 5 years of data instead of the 12 months worth they think is adequate. Yeah, you can't do seasonality with 1 year.
Yeah, I'll take this. I recently took on a client, and they provided me with a data set, and I noticed that they had 50 participants, but in their manuscript they had written about 49. And so I got data for 49 participants. I wanted to check some of the statistics that had already been done. And so I asked for the full data set, and the response was, oh, you don't need that. We only want to do the analysis on the 49. And I said, well, it really helped me to know to look back at that 50th subject to learn about their data and to include them in the descriptive statistics. And so they were very generous in giving me their data, but it did take a couple of back and forths. And I think just telling them, you know, it's really helpful for me to see it all. I really can get information out of the other data, and just being honest about why you want it.
Good. Emily, anything to add?
Yes, I always tell my students that other people's data is sort of like our code, right? And if somebody just asked you to just send your code along, you would probably not want to do that right away, right? You would want to go tidy it up a little bit, add some comments, maybe make it a little more efficient. And that people often feel that way with their data. So if you can establish a relationship where you're enthusiastic and you're understanding and supportive, that makes it sort of a safer space to share data, because I do think that it feels very personal to people.
That is great advice, and to help them, want to help them learn more from the data that they have. That's great. Okay, I'm keeping an eye on the time too. So do you have any tips on dealing with team members who just have no respect for anybody and are not willing to try? Eject button, right?
So it depends on how much that matters. So I used to keep a list a few jobs ago of people that I was not actually related to. And it was coworkers who I didn't appreciate their opinions. And it was a way of reminding myself that I only had to deal with their opinions on the work projects that we worked on together. And they did not get to have opinions on the rest of my life. And I was very lucky that was the case. And that is sort of a terrible list to keep. And I probably shouldn't have thought about it that way, but it made me feel a lot better. And it kept that in perspective, that it's one project or it's a few projects. And then if you can sort of come up with strategies, if it's causing a problem or if they're just being sort of rude, right, that maybe you can work around rudeness, but if they're causing a problem, maybe that is something that you can try to document in a way that you could get some help from your management.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes people are just having a bad day, but if it's consistent, wow. Anything else you'd like to add, Julia?
I'll just add that sometimes it doesn't work out. You know, if a person is consistently not recognizing and respecting you and the other team members, then something needs to happen. So eject button or recommendations to find another statistician or another group that could work with this person. You know, every organization has their own infrastructure and ways of managing HR teams like that, but sometimes it doesn't work out, and so you can respectfully back out.
Yeah, the disrespect implies some rudeness. And I just have to share on LinkedIn, I posted today, there was an interesting discussion. It's a children's book, but it's called Have You Filled a Bucket Today? And it makes the analogy of, you know, if you're going to dip into somebody else's bucket by criticizing them, that's not going to fill your bucket. So it makes it an abstract idea much more. And if you need to use a children's book at work, well, so, but oh my goodness, we have so many questions and we won't get to all of them, but we'd asked in advance if our guests would be willing to write a blog post to answer them as follow-up. So we will do that to the extent that we can. So thank you so much for joining. We appreciate our speakers, Julia and Emily, for staying on and answering so many great questions. And if you want to learn more about this kind of collaboration, we encourage you to check out their course, and we'll provide the link to the course description and the schedule in the chat. And we also encourage you to check out more of their statistical collaboration training videos. And we've got a link for that one we can share in the chat. So for more events like this, you can check out the topics at jump.com/statspeaking and follow JUMP on social media. So Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, to get reminders of these and similar events. Thanks for watching and see you soon.